We've been brought together here today on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Wendat by the Unite Against Austerity campaign. The campaign aims to build awareness of and a common language around the policies of austerity and their impact, and to bring our various struggles together in a larger anti-austerity fight back.
Part of the history that I wanted to tell you is that living in this country and living under those policies were so discriminatory and very oppressive to people of my time and still today. We are treaty people, all of us here in this room. Canada has the peace and friendship treaties that this country was based on, and the treaties of 1876 was a nation-to-nation agreement. It was that we would share the land. We didn't give up our land or cede it to anyone. It was to share and make agreements of resources and how we were to live on this land. That was the founding document that this country is founded on. I think that we need to advocate to continue to honor those treaties. I want to talk about building this relationship in Canada. We have to rebuild a relationship with each other. And that starts with the treaties, and being allies and building solidarity is key for us to take a stand against an oppressive government. Bill C-45 is another dressed up kind of bill that says, well, we're here to protect your rights. But it's all, in my opinion, it's a false sense of security. It's going to target vulnerable communities, the Indigenous communities, activists, people who stand up and voice their concerns in civil disobedience. If people were to reject this, it would be dodging a lot of danger for a lot of people in this country. I think we need to continue to educate ourselves about the effects of residential schools and what people have faced in this country. We need to build that dialogue. The awareness is important because it's easy to lash out in hate, but to understand the ignorance that is powerful in our system, because it allows for oppression to continue. And that's how I see Bill C-51. I've lived through a lot of oppression in this country, and it's not something we want to share with the rest of the Canadians here. You know, being removed from your family and standing up and resisting, we've been doing that for over 150 years. So that's my concern, that we need to take a stand right now against the oppressive bills that this government is trying to ram through Parliament. And Bill C-51 right now is a big concern at this point for me. So thank you for letting me share with you.
Meanwhile, the Premier announces a budget, and when reviewing it, 4 main things really popped out at me. First of all, no new revenue tools except for a tiny tax on beer sales, while they continue to offer low corporate tax rates to corporations. You know, if they would just bump that corporate tax rate back up to 14% where it belongs, this would solve a lot of the problems that we're having right now when it comes to spending cuts and cuts to public services. And that's another thing I saw loud and clear in this budget. Spending on public sector programs is already amongst the lowest in North America, and the Premier brags about this. I don't understand why. But cuts to public services affect my members because it means job loss, and it affects all of you because it means you'll have to wait longer for services. You'll have to rely on private corporations that are accountable to profits, not to you. And the other thing that really jumped out at me in this budget that is just making me sick right now is the proposal to sell off publicly owned assets and further privatization. The 60% sell-off of assets in Hydro One is making me sick to my stomach. Listen, you know what? When it comes to infrastructure investment, I'm all for spending more money on public infrastructure. We do need it. But as long as we aren't burning the furniture to heat the house, right? Selling hydro to build transit just isn't necessary. If we could tax corporations at the rate that they should be taxed at, then we could pay for transit. There's a publicly funded boom right now in the mostly male construction sector, but there's a publicly unfunded recession in the mostly female public sector, and I don't think it's too much to ask for a little bit of fairness. The bottom line is that the first three things here are failing utterly, and the fourth that I mentioned could be a whole lot more equitable. So those are the challenges that we're facing right now and the impacts that they may have on our members if the government is successful in imposing this contract on us and selling off some of these public assets.
So despite what the governments tell you about migrant workers having all the paper rights that you and I have, they don't have. It's very differential treatment. And once again, the message is that the provincial laws and federal laws are what constructs migrant workers' vulnerability. Very important. Migrant workers are not inferior because they're from another country or because they speak another language or they may look a little different than us. And this is what we've seen with the Aboriginal communities, with people on social assistance, with people who are racialized. Over and over again, our laws treat people differently. So that's one of the first things that I think we have to do when we fight back. When we create fight backs, when we create solidarity, is changing laws and transforming our society. And also we have to talk, and to continue what my sister said earlier, there's a longer historical colonial feature of this. There's no coincidence whatsoever that the same racialized communities who toiled under indentureship and slavery are the same people who are working under exploitative conditions today. So it's a longer colonial structure that's created these unequal relations, both here in Canada and also overseas. So these are some of the reasons, these unequal global relations through capitalism and colonialism, which are forcing people to come to Canada. So it's not that migrant workers are taking our goddamn jobs, y'all. It's not that they're driving down wages. It's not that they're destroying our society and the way we know it because they look different or speak another language. It's because of those global economic conditions that we also need to challenge and to confront. I would argue that austerity is a permanent feature of migrant worker programs. Migrant worker programs enable and empower the greatest form of labor flexibility that employers have. What I mean by this is the fact that once a worker is no longer needed, they could be sent back to their home countries. And we saw this with the recent 4-and-4 rule. Just a couple of weeks ago, migrant workers, 70,000 workers were sent home, or in the process of being sent home, because they worked in Canada for 4 years, and they're now no longer allowed to work in Canada for at least a minimum of 4 years. So this is the greatest deportation in our history. So one, I think, is about us changing this narrative about migrant workers being temporary. Number two, it's learning from history and knowing that migrant workers aren't the enemies, but it's our enemies, the capitalists and our governments who are employers as well, who are creating these conditions that need to be challenged. Is when we're fighting this greater fight, the fight against privatization, it's always those most vulnerable communities, those communities that come under the greatest attacks. That's where our focuses need to be, because it's the most vulnerable when they start off on those groups and those little pittance of groups like migrant workers, those so-called pittance. They start off with the attacks there, and then those attacks come to each one of us. So it's building a larger, solidified form of resistance and showing true solidarity with those people who are the most impacted by government policies.
Since the crisis of 2008, we've seen, and not just in Toronto by any manner of means, an incredible intensification in the reckless agenda of austerity, and that it has been primarily about increasing the levels of exploitation and enrichment by really creating out there a climate of desperation. At this point, we are now beyond reduced entitlement. We are now talking about an agenda of outright social abandonment. And here in Toronto, the developing neoliberal city, that is certainly the case. And at the same time, there is this incredible proliferation of poverty. Move out of the centre of the city and they are building highly policed, underserviced enclaves of poverty in the suburban setting, where racialised immigrant communities will be massively and are massively overrepresented. The homeless population in the city of Toronto is growing at 14 times the rate of the general population. And when it comes to the homeless, the City of Toronto's declared policy is to ensure that so that people can access homeless shelters with some level of dignity, the shelter occupancy rates are supposed to be kept at 90%. We've been involved in a years-long struggle to try to enforce that policy, but they don't want to bring the occupancy levels down because they realize very, very well that if they do that, they're going to create a situation where there is some sense that you can survive if you're homeless in Toronto. And so they are prepared to let people die on the streets. And that, I think, drives home to us the fact that the level of the agenda of austerity has reached the level where they are prepared to abandon people to die on cold streets in the largest city in the country. And that's an indication of the enormity and the viciousness of the agenda that we're confronting. As I point out, the incredibly important and central role that the war on the poor plays in this is that it is, for all its viciousness, not over yet. It is clear that they are redefining and developing and intensifying the agenda of austerity as it is implemented. It is a brutal work in progress. I think that the central point has to be made that we are dealing with something that must be resisted, must be defeated, must be turned back as a matter of decency, as a matter of priority, and as a matter of human survival. Thank you very much.
And those budgets have already been cut. And yet we don't have a national conversation about austerity. So we need, I think the first job is to name it and help people understand it, and we need a national wake-up moment about austerity immediately. But I think progressives, anti-capitalists, leftists, social justice organizers have to be a lot bolder about using climate change in our analysis and our organizing. And I think that we need to do that because it offers us three huge opportunities. First of all, the climate crisis is the best argument we've ever had against austerity and the suicidal logic of our economic system. Second of all, it hands us a bold and ambitious and inspiring vision of an economic and social transformation that we have to effect on a very serious deadline. And third, this whole meeting is a recognition of the fact that we have to combine our struggles, we have to combine forces in order to beat back the agenda of austerity. In other words, I think the climate crisis offers a lens that encompasses all other existing social justice struggles without, and this is absolutely critical, without trumping any of them. In fact, on the contrary, I think the climate lens can supercharge existing struggles with the urgency and scientific basis that it has. So yes, we have to reverse austerity because it's wrong, because it's hurting people, because it's part of a legacy of colonialism and racism that affects every single one of us in every moment of our lives. But we also have to reverse austerity because it's a direct barrier to what we need to do to ensure the future habitability of the planet. The climate crisis shines a bright light on the fact that our economic systems need for growth at any cost. Our economy's need for the ever-increasing consumption of finite resources is leading us straight to catastrophe. There are no non-radical options left on the table. Either we have a radical change to our economic and social systems and political systems, or we are going to face radical changes to our physical systems. The root of the climate crisis is the economic logic of our time. And this is good news because we already know, because of its effects on humans, because of its insufferable inequality, that the economic system is in need of urgent change. And so this message that it's a matter of survival can actually lend a huge boost to our efforts if we can see how it can be useful and how it can play out in specific ways. We need a massive transformation to respond to the climate crisis. What does that transformation look like? If we respond to climate change in a justice-based way, it means attacking inequality, it means restoring public services, it means confronting racism, it means asserting First Nations land rights, it means creating hundreds of thousands of good unionized jobs. In other words, the world we want, the world we've been fighting for, is actually the world we need as a matter of survival.